Hi guys, welcome back to episode 103 of the Fitness Devil podcast. We've got Schuler on today. He's been around the industry a little while, so you're going to get a lesson in history of the fitness industry, why we have gyms all over the place that we all have to work out in, why fitness is more popular. We talk about the effects of the internet and how that has influenced a lot of what's going on in our fitness industry. A big discussion, a little bit of ranting on fads and trends that have come and gone in loose time in the industry. Some talk about cornflakes and enemas and a lot of other odd stuff. And we've got the lowdown on what's happening with the Fitness Summit in Kansas City in 2020. So you got to listen and find out.
Shut up and sit down.
Hey everyone, we've got Lou Schuler on here today. So he's one of the elder statesmen of the fitness industry. We're going to make probably a lot of old jokes. I think he's going to appreciate that. He is the editorial director of the Personal Trainer Development Center. And that's pretty much the largest personal training website in the world. So if you're not following it, you're listening to this podcast and you train people, you probably should. And so I actually looked, he has a Wikipedia page. So I don't know how many of our guests actually have their own Wikipedia pages. But he's also, it says on there, he previously worked as the fitness director of Men's Health and Men's Fitness magazines. And if you look closely, it lists off all the books he's written, mostly fitness and nutrition stuff with his prominent industry friends. Most of them were with Alan Cosgrove, who's an industry legend himself. And I actually got to meet Lou just shy of, 3 years ago at the Fitness Summit in Kansas City. He's the MC of it all and the personality behind it. And his fingerprints are all over the industry. So it's a real honor to have you here.
Well, thanks. And I'm glad it's my fingerprints and not my footprints, because that would imply something completely different. So anyway, nice to be here.
It would. And this is pretty impressive because that was a long list of stuff and Andrew nailed it. So I want everyone to appreciate that because that was a lot.
Anyone who's listened to this before knows that one of us bungles the script consistently. One of us doesn't. Time. Yeah. And
it's usually me.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
But it's the best. So this is funny, Lou. I'm usually the one that messes it up because Andrew's the writer for the thing and I just read it and I'm bad at reading. When Andrew screws it up, it's the best because he knows it and he like freezes up and then he's like, fuck. And it's the best. So you don't see Andrew flustered very often, but it's amazing when he does it live. So hopefully he does it today.
We'll see.
Boy, so I can look forward to that.
Yeah, like I'm totally gonna try to push it, but if you notice anything off, call him out on it because it's
okay. All right, I'll see if I can trip up the big fella and hilarity will ensue.
Well, let's actually start with what your current work is, what your current vision with the PTDC is, and if you have in mind a legacy that you'd like to leave on the industry with your own work and your work through the PTDC.
Well, so far my biggest legacy is not dying, and I'm proud of that. Yeah. So, sort of gets to the core of what we try to do as fitness professionals is help people live longer, and so so far so good. With the PTDC, I should say I met John at the Fitness Summit in 2012. We hit it off right away. Never ever thought that I'd be working for him, but when I look back at my career trajectory, I see that it makes perfect sense, because when I got my first job, fitness writing job at Men's Fitness magazine in 1992, my job was to interview personal trainers. And I had no way to sort out which were the good trainers and bad trainers. So what we ended up doing was we would work with trainers who had PR reps. We would work with the trainers who trained celebrities because that sounded cool. It's like you could say, well, here's, Andrew Coates, and he works with the most famous deer trainer up there in Alberta, or wherever you happen to be.
We're in Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta.
Represent your resume here.
Yeah.
So we would go with, okay, so who works with impressive clients? And one day I'm in a gym in LA, and we're doing a photo shoot with a trainer that I'd interviewed, and I noticed all the other trainers snickering about it behind his back. And it kind of, it was one of those minor light bulb moments where I realized, oh yeah, the people that I'm impressed with because they associate themselves with somebody who's well known, and I can't remember who it was back then, aren't necessarily the best trainers. And so as I got better at this, I got better at, I hope I got better at figuring out who had real information and who was just really good at self-promoting and, getting in, getting in close, establishing relationships with rich and powerful people. And, in LA, you can imagine all the different ways there are to do that. The guy, I'm not saying this ever happened to me, but, somebody might have been like a celebrity's, drug dealer or something, or, and suddenly that person's a trainer. We got him in the magazine and, we couldn't tell the difference. So that's sort of where my trajectory is, in that as I got more serious about this, and as fitness publishing grew and became, not just a niche, but an actual genre where, you could have a career doing this, I got to the point where I could work with the smartest trainers. I figured out how to meet them. I networked with them. We hung out. You've been to the fitness summit, so you know that there's some, really smart, I don't want to say innovative, probably innovative, but it's a great place to meet people who are on the way up, mm-hmm. and then to listen to the wisdom of people who have reached a certain level, and they might still be on the way up.
On the way
but
down.
You don't meet many people there who are on the way down. Well, you don't meet many on the way down. So it tends to be a really good place to meet and figure out who's on the way up, get to know people, and it becomes almost, I don't want to say a hierarchy because that sounds really bad and snobbish, but there is a progression where you might meet somebody who's just like this, kind of eager entry-level personal trainer, a beginner to the fitness industry. And within a few years, they might be speaking there. They might be the person, I might be quoting them in an article within 2 or 3 years if they've got some, they've got some great ideas. But it does all start with having a filtering system, and it took me a long time to develop that. I can't even remember what your question was. So when legacy.
Legacy.
You asked about the legacy. I hope the legacy is that I've identified a lot of really talented people who had a lot to offer. I've helped nurture them in their careers to the point where I could flagrantly abuse their expertise for my own personal gain and for our own articles and books and all that. And then in turn, those people would help somebody else. So I hope I've had a positive influence in that way, but I could also just be kidding myself because I'm old and that's what we do.
I wanted to throw, there's actually 2 thoughts I had there. First, you mentioned celebrity trainers. That got me thinking just how many or few people kind of in our sphere who work with famous people. And immediately I think Jordan Syatt with Gary Vaynerchuk, Ben Bruno, he's got... what's her name? Kate Upton, and does some work with Justin Timberlake and some other people in LA.
What's her name? The comedian does the best one.
Chelsea Handler.
Yeah.
Chad Landers works with some people in the Hollywood area. Joe DeFranco, I think, is someone we respect a lot. He's got a few celebrity people. Triple H, the wrestler.
Triple H is the best one.
But in our universe, it doesn't necessarily equate training famous people with being kind of a really, really respected trainer. So there's that. And then you're talking about
it's possible.
It's possible,
but
totally.
There is no natural connection between those two things. In fact, if you're training celebrities, you may be more likely to be. I shouldn't even say that, but let's just say there's no connection. Some of the smartest people I know and I've interviewed have worked with famous people, with high-level athletes. But like I said, there's Alan Cosgrove, I don't know if he's ever worked with a celebrity, and he, has probably been the biggest influence on my entire career. We've known each other since 1999. So in those 20 years, I've probably learned more from Alan it's possible I've learned more from Alan than every other fitness professional put together. But Alan would modify that by saying that he was just teaching me stuff that he learned from other people, like Mark Verstegen and whoever else he would consider his influences over the years that he learned from them. He taught people like me. I then passed that knowledge on, I hope, farther down the line. So the closest I think I can remember Alan coming to a celebrity, I went out to visit him at the first iteration of his gym. I saw Alan and Rachel. It was just a little storefront in a little strip mall out there in Santa Clarita. And he pointed to a woman on a treadmill and he said, she's a porn actress.
Actress.
And I'm pretty sure And that may even be a false memory. I may be conflating a couple of other memories, but
that would be a bad one to screw up. That'd be a bad one to screw up. Hey, Alan's trading points.
But I think Alan would laugh at it. He would be able to correct the story. But point being that you would have never noticed her. And of course, I wouldn't have noticed her anyway because I was married then, and watching porn something you don't do.
Someone would recognize her, just not you.
At least in my marriage, yeah. So I wouldn't have recognized her anyway. But he said that even people who do watch porn wouldn't have recognized her without her makeup and wearing all these clothes and shit. So
I think nowadays it'd be more likely with the rise of the internet and pornography. The porn stars are like almost as famous as some actors at this point.
Mm.
How do we get it? Why did you bring it here?
Dean, your wife listens to this podcast.
Well,
so
she
tread very carefully.
She wouldn't who's going to disagree with that?
The second thing I was going to say was, well, you described kind of, people going in there. And I remember when I've been to 3 of the fitness summits now. And the first time I went down, I met you. I knew Dean Somerset because, he's a good friend here in Edmonton. And my friend Hannah Gray came with us. And then I met, what felt like the core industry at that time. And I have so many friends and great people that I've gotten to know really well, and I consider very good friends from that first year. People like Johnny T or an Eric Bach, who it's really fun to see how well a guy like Eric has done. And
Eric Bach was there in 2017.
He was there in 2017. I remember hanging out with him and Carter Good and Robbie Farlow, all in having scotch in one of the hotel rooms. And you see what's happened to Carter's career as well, and Robbie's done really well for himself. But a lot of those people have gone on to do more. And I mean, everybody just met me and I was complete nothing in the industry at that point. And I've had a lot of really good things happen in my career, writing for T-Nation now and various other stuff. You talk about quoting people. I mean, you asked me to contribute to a piece for the PTDC. So it's very much what's happened in my career. And the point of this is not to pump my own tires. The point of this is to say anybody who is going to go to these events, we're hosting one here in Edmonton very, very soon. There's an opportunity to meet and network people in the industry if you take advantage of it. Don't just sit there and just absorb the information, which is good. But if you get in front of all these people and you meet people, treat the speakers that you kind of follow like normal human beings, but meet the other participants, meet the other the attendees, because like you said, these people, some of them are really on that track to go further. And you can grow together, be inspired. And I found that event so inspiring, and it kickstarted me to do so much more in my career. This podcast is definitely in part because of that first time I was there.
Stan Efferding was in the crowd the one year I went. So I mean, in terms
that was 2018,
and that's as a participant. He's like he was one of the strongest people in the world at the time when he was participating in powerlifting. But he's still, for his age, he has to be one of the most strongest dudes for his age. And
he's a monster.
And he just came to listen, which is crazy at that point.
Now, when we gave you some of the stuff in advance, you got really excited about this next one. So,
which one, about the fads?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you said you like to rant, so we'll see how ranty you can get. We've had some good rants on here. Sam Pogue probably.
I know. I'm gonna sound like the conspiracy theorist with all the all the threads and newspaper headlines tacked up on my wall and all these threads connecting. But I hope it's funny. Okay.
Well, so but you've been around for a while, so you've seen fads, trends, and fundamental shifts in our world, so the fitness world. Is there anything currently exciting that's trending that you believe is a little bit more than a temporary fad? And what if anything emerging?
All right, he already blew it. Try that one again.
What? Is there anything currently exciting?
Is little more than a temporary fad. Completely changes the meaning.
Now I'm lost. So, see, we fucked up the big question.
You fucked up the big question.
So is there anything currently exciting and trending you believe is a little more than a temporary fad? And what, if anything, emerging now do you feel will be a major paradigm shift in how our business works, specifically the fitness industry?
I don't know. I mean, the benefit of being my age, the only benefit is that I've seen everything come around twice already.
And forgotten most of it.
Yeah, I mean, I started working out when I was 13 at a time when people thought it was ridiculous. And I know it's been a few years since I told this story in an interview, but I used to, I would run to get in shape for high school football, and I'd be out running and people would stop their cars and ask if I wanted to lift because they assume I must be going somewhere. And telling people that I worked out just seemed like this, it was such a strange thing. I can remember in high school football, one of my teammates came in, after a summer off school, came into, August football practices. And he was just, he's pretty jacked. And so, I was excited because we could work out together. This guy I really liked. And I can remember my teammates saying, well, he didn't get that from lifting weights. He got it from throwing hay bales. And I should say this was a rural high school it was in Festus, Missouri. So people thought, all the cliche stuff that weightlifting makes you muscle bound, all that makes you slow, muscle bound. They didn't believe it did anything. They thought that throwing hay bales onto a truck, which is certainly exercise, they thought that was how you got big and strong. It didn't have anything to do with all the damn food you ate after you threw those hay bales onto the truck. And the thing about working on a farm is they give you a lot of fucking food. So somebody who's throwing hay bales onto a truck, yeah, he's going to gain 20 pounds of muscle that summer. It's going to be 20 pounds because he eats so much. It's going to be muscle because he exercises so much. But it's not resistance training. It's just repeated hard activity with a caloric surplus. So that's where I started, and I was already working out by then. Joined my first commercial gym in 1980 when I graduated from college. So by the time I got a chance to work for a fitness magazine in 1992, I had already been in this world for a long time. I'd been working out in gyms for 12 years, and now the difference was that everybody was working out in gyms and people were interested in it. You could actually have a magazine that made money talking about that. So when we talk about trends, as I did this longer and again, was trying to figure out who had the best information, who didn't, I began to read more and more about the history of the industry, which I became increasingly fascinated with. I'm kind of a history buff anyway, in the sense that I read Wikipedia and popular histories and shit.
You are part of history. I'm going to continue to make old jokes through the entire episode. So.
Well, I've seen a lot of it.
You are an historical figure already. Okay, please continue.
Thank you. So one of the fascinating things I discovered was that I wasn't just noticing cycles repeating themselves. History is cycles that repeat themselves. So here's one that is kind of, I hope this one's entertaining. So white flour was invented in the late 19th century. And it
just
immediately did two important things. One, it made flour, it gave it shelf life and made it transportable. So instead of flour going rancid because it was made from whole grains, they could grind all that out and they could bleach the flour and you'd have this nice white flour. So not only was it portable, not only did it last forever on your shelf unless the cockroaches got to it, but now for upper class people, it was acceptable because now they could have white bread, whereas brown bread and brown flour always look kind of dirty to them. Then you have this epidemic of constipation. And people, if you look at the early health gurus, Bernard McFadden, Sandow, you look at what people were writing about personal health back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, they were obsessed with constipation. So there was this guy named John Harvey Kellogg, who was a physician, and he was and also a doctor. And he had this famous clinic in Battle Creek, Michigan. Now, do you know what Battle Creek is known for? The reason that you may not be of an age, but growing up, if there was a TV commercial for breakfast cereal, it said, from Battle Creek, Michigan, or product of Battle Creek, Michigan. It would say that on those cereal boxes. That's because Kellogg's and Post were based there. And the reason they were based there is because this guy, John Harvey Kellogg, accidentally invented cornflakes. And the reason he invented cornflakes was because he thought it would kill sex drive.
Yeah.
You got this guy who's a doctor. And what he does as a doctor is he treats these affluent people, and a lot of them come into his clinic constipated. And so he's giving them daily enemas. And he also is convinced that sex is like this, massive societal impurity, and he wants people to have less sex. So he invents fucking cornflakes to kill their sex drive. So now you got white flour, you got constipation, you got enemas, and you have cornflakes. You have breakfast cereal. Then what follows from that is at the same time. So this guy's a religious fanatic. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. you have this tremendous what academics call a clean living movement, which is this search, this quest for purity, not just individual purity by purging out your bowels every day with a fucking enema, or eating cornflakes so you don't waste all your purity on, sex. My God, who wants that? You now have public health advocates, including some of the earliest bodybuilding guys like Sandow, big public health advocate in the UK, or what was Great Britain back then, along with in the US, Bernard McFadden, famous bodybuilder and physical culturist and publisher. And these people are advocating for public health. At the same time, the American political system, Teddy Roosevelt is, the great progressive president. He establishes the national parks. He wants to have a better society, a better country that works for people. He also wants to blow up a lot of shit. He liked war. So, I'm not saying that anybody here is perfect. And then at the same time, you have this drive to make alcohol illegal. You have this drive for prohibition. That, again, tied to religion, tied to sex, tied to constipation, all these things where alcohol comes out as the villain of its time. And it caused tremendous social problems. I'm not saying it didn't. But along with that, the women who were advocating for temperance, or who were advocating for prohibition, for temperance, the temperance movement, why were they women? Because they were the ones who took the brunt of the effects of alcohol, because their men, if they were alcoholics, if they were spending their money, the women and children suffered. So it was the women who drove this. And of course, the churches drove this. And you end up 1920 simultaneously, women get the right to vote and liquor is made illegal. We have prohibition. Both these things happen in 1920, 1921 in the U.S. So that's the culmination of this big drive for public health, this clean living movement. A lot of those effects are still with us today. Every time when the next big health and fitness and clean living and purity movement started in the 1960s, again, you have crappy food and people are constipated and they know that they're doing something wrong and people are drinking and smoking. So this purity movement starts all over again, trying to solve the same problems the last purity movement set out to solve. And we repeat this whole cycle. Now, the details are different every time, but the drive is the same to try to purify people. And so all these trends we have now aren't necessarily related to constipation. More likely, they're related to the obesity epidemic. That's why we have all these crazy diets. But a lot of the reason we have these crazy diets is because of this idea that we can purify our bodies. We can purify our bodies if we don't have sugar. We can purify our bodies if we don't eat processed foods. We can purify our bodies if we fast for X number of hours a day. Weight loss is nice. That will follow if you eat less food and you eat less of this terrible processed food. But we've taken things like a simple carbohydrate, actually sugar is a complex carbohydrate. Sorry, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
We've taken like fruit's a simple sugar. So we've taken this quest for to eat a healthier diet, which would mean eating less of these highly processed foods, including, sugars and manufactured oils and all that. And we've made it out to be this quest for purity, which is that these things aren't just unnecessary. They don't just lack nutrients. They don't just give you calories you don't need. They ruin your body. They make your body impure. And so we have to eliminate them. We have to go on these long fasts to purify our bodies by, the same way that medieval monks used to whip themselves, on the back because, oh my God, I woke up with a boner this morning. I got to purify. I got to get all those damn sex thoughts out of my head. So they'd be whipping themselves and like wearing knives on their thighs so that they're constantly in pain to remind themselves, don't have a boner tonight. Don't have a boner tonight. And they wake up with a boner anyway and they start the whole process all over again.
I didn't know that one.
Have you seen the Da Vinci or read the Da Vinci Code?
I've seen it. I've read it.
So I don't.
Yes.
I've read it. I haven't seen it, so I don't know how much they portray it. But I guess one of the monks, the bad guy,
he does whip himself.
He whips himself and does a lot of this sort of weird shit. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and he's not just a monk; he's an albino monk.
Yeah.
So there you go. Now we're back to white flour, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. This is, I get what you're saying. Basically, it started with corn. But
Really?
It started with cornflakes.
It's like I go into all that, and you're like, I think I followed that. So
Yeah.
I guess I failed.
Well, of course, apparently Dean's dog Penny objected to it because she just had a little meltdown. So you guys probably heard the squawking and howling there. So
yeah, she's like, no, cornflakes are fine. Like,
no, she's just constipated.
They don't kill your sex drive. The
She-
neutering me that killed my sex drive. But no,
it's funny because like that, even with the Sandow thing and the white, like it was that 1920s. So we're still like that's all just come around again. Like alcohol's been a big thing for the last 3 years. Sugar and all this shit. That's like every year it comes up.
There's always something. Somebody emerging fitness professional has decided to go all in on this is bad.
Right.
And I have the solution, the simple solution. And you know, carbohydrates have been demonized, fats have been demonized, gluten is routinely demonized more and more now. All of these sort of things. So it comes in cycles.
They just have more ammo now.
So,
like, would you agree? Like, because now with research and science, they can skew it to fit their narrative almost, so that we almost see these arguments a lot more often with a little bit better backing, if that makes sense, for the people that want to use it.
I don't think they have.
No.
I mean, there's more of everything right now.
That's
There's
true.
more media. There's more science.
Mhm.
I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I get emails. I mean, they come in waves, but sometimes I'll be getting, I don't know how many dozens of them in a month, asking Dr. Schuler to come speak at some, biology conference or, something like that. And I got on their, well, I won't go into detail about how I got onto their radar, but once you're on their radar, they just pester you forever and so these people are throwing these bogus conferences. We know that there's bogus journals out there where basically they'll publish anything. They don't even read these studies, alleged studies that they're publishing. And every now and then a genuinely fraudulent study will make it into a legitimate, peer-reviewed journal. But when it's retracted with like, with like nuclear warheads retraction, where it's not, where they pull it, they fall on their swords. We're so sorry we did this to you. So science, I think, is self-correcting.
Mhm.
And I think any legitimate scientist will tell you, science doesn't come to conclusion. Science, there's never a final answer. There's always, here's what we know now. Here's what we used to know. Here's what we will investigate in the future and hope to know better as we go along. But nobody's ever going to have the final answer because humans keep changing, and and technology keeps changing, and we find things we didn't find before. So I'm not too worried about the science supporting bad practices or supporting people's personal belief systems. I think that's more about the people themselves finding the most obscure science, and sometimes, as others who are much smarter than me have shown, sometimes people's references don't actually say what the people claim they say. I mean, I started noticing this in political writing, where if somebody wants to write wants to condemn somebody, they'll have they might have hundreds of references in their book, but when people go to check their books, they realize, hey, these references are just, all they did was it's just a headline of an article that doesn't look like they even read it because the article doesn't say what they think it says.
One point there, I trust everything you're saying is true, but I want clarification. Is there any good research backing coffee enemas? Because that came back around too. There actually might be. I
have not updated my knowledge of the literature on coffee enemas, and I apologize because I know, I should have known you guys would want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, because I didn't want to until you told me that it started at all, and now I'm thinking that's why it got so big, because I think Joe Rogan blew it up, but it was actually big.
Somebody who's actually concerned about purity probably wouldn't use coffee in the enema because caffeine is one of those things that people try to purge from themselves. No caffeine, no alcohol.
That's not the purity crowd. You're right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Damn purity crowd.
Yeah.
This has been awesome. Just even the fact that you've tied that all together means that you've been around. I couldn't have done that. Like my
But
my
just for the record, I was not around in the late 19th century when.
That's true, but you're very interested in it.
You certainly made it sound like it. You made it sound like you were the
You were-
editor for all
you-
those early.
But
articles.
see, this is why I read history, is that if I'm reading something really good, I can just sort of transport myself back there and try to imagine what it would be like to wear those uncomfortable clothes, those itchy wool clothes, and to, never go outside your door without a three-piece suit and a hat, no matter how hot it is.
Could you imagine though? Yeah.
Pardon?
Could you imagine though being there and then like thinking cornflakes is the answer, or like I gotta get my enema, like, and having no other knowledge than like the big headwigs are like you have to do that.
Can you imagine being here today and believing the Earth is flat and all of the other ridiculous bullshit that's being circulated around? It's no different today than it is. There's just as much ignorance floating around, and that ties in with kind of what I want to go to next. Is the source of a lot of all this bullshit is the internet, or at least the way that internet spreads these things. So it's really hard to anticipate major trends or technologies. I don't think anyone would have been able to, in the fitness industry in the 80s or even the 90s, have anticipated what the internet has done to our industry. So I wonder if there have any, you've been around long enough to see major, shifts in things. I wonder if there's anything you really failed to anticipate. And is there anything that failed to happen that you felt sure would in the industry, or just anything, any trends along those lines that just surprised you, either that did happen or didn't happen?
All right, so I'm going to go back in history a little bit.
Okay.
I can remember when the first kid in my class in maybe third grade, first kid in the class whose family got a color TV, and he came to class. And we all gathered around, and he told us what Batman's costume looks like, Batman and Robin, what colors their costumes were in color. We had no idea because we just had black and white TVs. So I can remember growing up, we had 3 networks and PBS, and then there was one thing on what was called the UHF band, where it was just like they showed old Popeye reruns and Three Stooges and stuff. So that's what I grew up with, basically 5 channels, and then a 6th channel was like a big deal. I can remember remote controls, the first ones. So when I got to college in the late 1970s, so I went, when I went into journalism school, we worked on what they called VDTs, which were these were the first computers inside newsrooms. And all they thought that these things would be good for was processing copy. So they called them video display terminals, and there was like there was an internal network. Obviously, there was no internet, so nothing was connected on the outside. But what they told us in journalism school, which turned out to be completely true, and nobody understood how true it would be, was they said, broadcasting is going to be dead in your career. So we would graduate in 1979. By the time we start our careers in the 1980s, broadcasting will be dying, and what people are going to do instead is narrowcasting. Now, we thought it applied to cable TV, which was already starting to happen, and to publishing. So that's a reason why when I got to Men's Fitness magazine in the early 90s, and I realized that there was such a thing as writing about fitness, I looked at that and I thought back to what I learned in journalism school, and I thought, oh, so this is narrowcasting only in publishing. We're going to go to this niche market, and we're going to appeal to this niche market, and this is an actual business. This isn't just like some fad. So the internet, of course, I didn't anticipate. I can remember when we got email at Men's Fitness magazine, and it was like for the first time, it felt like every day I went home with more work than when I got there. And it was just like this overwhelming thing. And I know it wasn't overnight, but it just felt it happened so fast. Once readers figured out that we had email and they could contact us directly, all of a sudden it just felt like our workloads had, I don't want to say doubled, but they had just increased in this really dramatic way. And I think that stress, that feeling of you always go home with more work, that you're always tempted once we had email on our phones, that, we were always tempted to just work every waking hour. I can remember when that all started. So that was something I didn't anticipate. I had no idea. I can even remember in grad school in the early 1990s, one of my classmates who was the tech guy had, wrote for like business magazines and stuff. He had email, And I remember being fascinated by this. It was like, wow, how does this work? So you just like type this and then you hit send and it goes to somebody somewhere else. Yeah. What else is it good for? I don't know. I mean, what do you guys talk about? Well, I don't know. Because you have these old dial-up modems. So the only, basically it was just we're emailing each other because we can. It would be much more efficient to just pick up the phone and talk to each other. It'd be much faster and we'd have more detailed conversations. So I can remember the start of all these things. And of course, I didn't anticipate where they were going to go. Now, one thing I do take some pride in is that I saw the benefits of exercise and I saw the potential of it. And I thought other people would catch on to this, and they did. When it hit critical mass, I was able to make a living in it. I didn't anticipate that, but once I got there, it was like, oh, this exists, this can grow, I can stay with this. And that's how probably the most prescient thing I did was I became among the first, if not the first, conventionally trained journalists who got into fitness specifically and took it seriously enough that I became part of the fitness industry while still being a journalist and still following all the rules of the profession. Lots of others did later, but I think I was among the first, and I take some pride into seeing the potential of that. But other things, when I hear these nutrition fads, I'm not really in the loop with what the kids are doing and what people are arguing about, but I hear these things and I'm just like, why? Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you go on this super restrictive diet when you don't have a disease that the super restrictive diet was invented for? Why would you go on a keto diet when you don't have epilepsy? You don't need a keto diet. Why would you do that to yourself? And people, I have to say, and I can't back this up with research. I don't know if the research is out there, but I see these extreme diets and I wonder if future generations are going to understand that these were all signs of eating disorders, that people were inflicting eating disorders on themselves or masking eating disorders by pretending to be, by following a fad diet. So if somebody has that tendency anyway, if they already have an eating disorder, maybe that fad diet makes it legitimate and makes it acceptable. Now, that said, I also didn't anticipate that there would be websites out there for women with anorexia where they actually celebrate it, where it's like, isn't this cool? We all got, what they call it, pro-ANI or something, ANI.
Is that real?
So I obviously didn't anticipate that the internet, since I didn't anticipate the internet itself, I didn't anticipate that it would be such a cesspool of encouraging the worst aspects of not only our psychology, but of our politics and everything else.
Do you remember the point in which you said fitness hit critical mass, but was there a point where it started reaching its true potential? Because it obviously would have built up and now it feels like it blew up. Do you remember the point in which it just kind of took off even more than the internet?
I remember the exact moment. It was 1976 and I'm sitting in a movie theater and I'm watching the first Rocky movie. And Rocky takes off his shirt. Now, Rocky was, Stallone in 1976 was not Andrew Coates jacked. He wasn't Dean Guido jacked. No. He was just looked like a guy who worked out. So he pulls off his sweater and he's got a wife beater. And you could hear everybody in the theater go, all the guys are like, whoa. And all the women are like, oh. And that was the moment. And by the early 1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger's the biggest movie star in the world. By the early 1980s, that was it. You would see all of a sudden a guy like Harrison Ford, who was just a regular looking dude, and that was why he was popular. You see him in movies, and all of a sudden he's jacked. He's got abs, he's got pecs and all this. And at that point, every movie star had to be in shape. And back in the day. So can I tell you?
Absolutely.
I'll sidetrack myself. When I worked at Men's Fitness, Joe Weider, it was his magazine. He had all these old buddies. And there was this one guy named Bob Del Monteque. And Bob was, so old school that because he was one of the few guys in L.A. who worked out and understood fitness, the movie studios used to hire him to get their movie stars in shape. And the problem with movie stars back then was that their job was to go out to nightclubs and be seen. So these people were just drinking. So Bob sometimes he'd have like a week to get these guys dried out and in shape. So he's like, he knew he couldn't do an actual, periodized strength and conditioning routine with these guys, or however he would have described it back then. So he told me, he said, yeah, we just had to give him amphetamines, and that's how we got these drunkards in shape for their movies, so they didn't look like absolute shit on the screen. So I can't remember exactly where I was going before I sidetracked myself there, but I'm sure there was a point somewhere, and I hope I made it.
Yeah, it was just they kind of tied it together in the sense that like I connect fitness with the internet and articles, and that's how I grew up finding information. But back then, it would have been movies because you didn't know people could be that jacked because it wasn't normal. And then when you see it, you're like, holy shit, that makes sense. But that would have made sense because that's where everyone would have piled in to see the Rocky movie. And it's like now it's on the stage because there was no internet. It was like that was where that was popular culture, the sense of
I think people forget how pervasive everything is information through the internet, that what it was like to live without it. Examples when music videos were still on MTV, or we had much music in Canada instead of like 16 and Pregnant and all these other stupid fucking shows. And the way that we consumed music was different. You would listen to the radio and you would wait for a song you wanted. And I remember using a tape deck to tape songs off the radio.
Yeah.
And that goes back a bit. So anyone who's like 23 or 24 is going to be listening going, really? What the fuck? This is like even before CDs. Or you'd obviously go to the record store.
You couldn't just download it for free?
You couldn't download it for free. You go to the record store and you pay $20 for a CD or a tape or an album, a record. Yeah. Or you would wait and you'd sit in front of Much Music and hope that something interesting would come on. Now, you can go to YouTube and listen to anything anytime you want. You can download, you have a streaming service like Apple or Spotify or SoundCloud. You just look up a song and you can get it instantly. So that's all very, very different. There's such a ubiquity to information now that wasn't present before.
Right.
And it makes sense that the information we were getting about fitness was distilled down through only a few mediums. Fitness magazines was a major one. Right. And then the images of people in Hollywood. And then just the things that the older guys told you in the gym. You just simply couldn't point and click and search for something the way that you easily can now. So things have changed a lot.
It was probably better back then. Was it better back then? I guess you can compare and contrast.
I like the internet. I like being able to, if somebody tells you something that's absolute bullshit, you can find out why it's bullshit. Learn where the person got the bullshit information. You have to be, you have to have some discipline, because it's easy to fall into rabbit holes that just confirm whatever bullshit you want to believe. Like we were talking about earlier, people find bogus studies. They'll claim studies say things they don't say. They'll tear apart legitimate experts. They'll find the smallest flaw in an argument and pretend that invalidates the entire thing. There's this arguing style that we didn't experience offline. This really aggressive style. Like, can you imagine you're in an office and you're talking about something and somebody disagrees with you? Are they going to go right to, well, that just shows how fucking stupid you are. What a goddamn moron. Where'd you get that? You trusted this guy. Well, here's this guy I trust. And you would never talk to a human being like that. And even in the early days of the internet, that wasn't the norm. But I think that people who were outrageous were entertaining and people followed them. And then it all went downhill from there.
You want to see some really funny stuff like that, go on to Spencer Dodalski's Instagram, and anytime he posts stuff and see some of the outrageous bullshit people respond with. And Spencer has fun with it. He just likes to post the ridiculous comments.
Well, at this point, he's going more ridiculous because it's going to be stupid comments regardless. Because before it was kind of informative, and now it's just he's making fun of people. Like today, this one was bad. But did you see the one today?
No.
He posts like a funeral, and they're like saying, "Oh, God bless. Does anyone have anything to say?" As the casket's going down.
Oh yeah.
And the one guy's like, "I'm vegan." I was like, oh my God, Spencer. So I don't know. It's just that whole idea.
He's got a lot of credibility, so he's really good at pushing people's buttons. I enjoy.
Wait, I don't get it. What? Who said I'm vegan? The guy in the casket?
So they had like two pictures, the same picture. One was the casket going in and a bunch of people, and the priest is like, "Does anyone have anything to say?" And this one guy has his head down. On the next picture is like, "I'm vegan."
It's the way that vegans or CrossFitters or
they have to say they're vegan.
They have to tell you what they do.
It was pretty dark though. That was, I don't know. It's I felt bad laughing. But like those are the best jokes. Sometimes I didn't feel bad at all. Yeah, we won't get into that rabbit hole about dark humor on the internet and fitness even. This kind of comes back and ties everything together. You spend your time curating the work and ideas of other fitness professionals. Would you kind of share some of your personal wisdom about helping to better the lives of our clients and followers just based on your time in this industry? Because I think it's valuable for people to hear kind of your tidbits.
The most important advice, and this is the whatever the opposite of profound is. I mean, this is about as obvious, but sometimes I don't think it's as obvious as it should be, is that you have to be good at what you do before you can help people. You can't help people if you yourself don't know what you're doing. And you might be good at marketing, but eventually you'll get exposed, and hopefully the audience will figure out you don't know what you're talking about. So the best advice I can give people, and I've given to I don't know how many people over the years, is focus on becoming better at what you do. Everybody that I've worked with has spent years, learning and developing their craft before any of the rest of us ever heard of them. And now there's this idea that if you're, 21, 23, you got to be famous right away. You got to have 500,000 followers on Instagram right away. You got to have this marketing funnel right away. And the thing is, you don't have anything to market. You don't have anything to say. You might have, you might be a prodigy, and you might be ahead of where the typical 21 or 23-year-old is, but that doesn't mean that you have anywhere near enough skill, knowledge. You certainly don't have perspective. You couldn't have the experience at 21. Like, for example, all right, here's an example. Joe Weider used to claim, he was like trainer or champion since whatever it was, 1936. And then if you did the math, it was like, well, Joe would have been like 14, and he claims he was a trainer of champions when he was like fucking 14. So how would that work? Well, maybe he was talking about training himself. Maybe he was talking about training somebody else who was, who went on to do something, or maybe he just completely made it up. I don't know. But the point was, you couldn't have been good enough to train champions. If somebody became a champion, it would have been a happy accident. But you certainly weren't good enough at this age, 14 or 15 years old, to do these things. And I think, he would use that as his claim to legitimacy. But the thing is, he was certainly ambitious, and he was certainly street smart, and he certainly had this kind of raw. This is so it seemed to be just an instinct for self-promotion and for figuring out what the next thing is and rising up. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have the same long curve as everybody else to figure out how these things worked. Because when he started off, he had this idea that, he used to write fan letters to Bob Hoffman, and Bob Hoffman would just make fun of him, blow him off. And so what did Weider do? He went up and he, Weider had been this Olympic lifting guy. And, as Hoffman was, Bob Hoffman of Strength and Health magazine, York Barbell, he was the U.S. Olympic weightlifting coach back when we used to win gold medals in Olympic weightlifting. So he blows off Weider, makes fun of bodybuilding, uses all these, does all this, homophobic shit, against Weider. I guess they make fun of him for being Jewish and all this stuff. And so what does Weider do? He's got a clear open field, and he owns bodybuilding. He owns the Mr. Olympia. He owns the magazines. He owns the supplements. He owns the entire goddamn industry. And they left it to him in the 1960s because they Hoffman wanted, macho dude wanted to score points. And he just left, he left bodybuilding completely undefended, whereas he had every advantage. He was the top guy, and he just let this guy coming up. He didn't anticipate that this guy coming up would eventually own everything that Hoffman owned.
And no one knows who the fuck Hoffman is. Right? I've never heard of Hoffman before, right? No one knows who the fuck this guy is.
Bob Hoffman?
Yeah.
You've heard of John Grimmick, right?
Nope.
John Grimmick?
No.
Famous bodybuilder from the 1940s?
No, actually, that's not a name I've heard. There's a lot of the classic ones I have, but Hoffman I've never heard of. Just ultimately the point, that is the fact that Joe Weider, anyone who's been around bodybuilding at all knows who Joe Weider is. Joe is, as you said, profoundly influential. He is the man who brought Arnold Schwarzenegger to America,
right,
and largely created and promoted Arnold into what he is. And if you want to think about it this way, we probably don't have commercial gyms everywhere the same way without Arnold Schwarzenegger. And as you talked about, Stallone in the 80s and his rise in movies. But Arnold was fitness, and Arnold was one of the most pivotal figures in bringing fitness from just straight Hollywood and bodybuilding is this sort of like sideshow niche thing into the purest mainstream appeal.
Well, I'll push back on that a little bit. I think what did it was Muscle Beach. I think that in the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s especially, these guys all went out to Muscle Beach, and that's where they learned. That's where they saw the future. So there's this guy. His name is completely lost to history. His name is Vic Tanny, and he was one of those Muscle Beach guys. He was one of the lifters there, and Jack LaLanne was there, and a lot of people who would have been brand name. Joe Gold was down there of Gold's Gym. So these guys are all down there, and Jack LaLanne has tried to start his own gym, and Joe Gold has started his own gym, and Vic Tanny figured out that you could franchise gyms, and it was a Ponzi scheme. I mean, it was a pyramid scheme. It was it was all kind of a. But he would build these gyms with all this chrome and mirrors, and he put chandeliers, and some of his early gyms had like fucking bowling alleys in them. So he just had this idea that people would work out if they could go to like this really cool place that didn't feel like a sweaty gym, like certainly Gold's Gym, in Venice Beach would have felt like that to somebody. All these bodybuilders worked out at a place called the Dungeon in Santa Monica. So, which I think was run by Tanny's brother Armand, who worked for Joe Weider later. So Weider came out. He saw all these guys at Muscle Beach. I think pretty much everybody made a pilgrimage to Muscle Beach. Bob Hoffman, in his Strength and Health magazine, he had all these Muscle Beach people, and he helped popularize it because his magazine was really popular. So from this Muscle Beach scene, this is where the American servicemen are coming through Los Angeles, a lot of cases going overseas, coming back from overseas before, during, and after World War II. And they see this, and they see people, for example, they see this weight bench. And they see people doing bench presses. Well, even people who worked out hadn't seen anybody doing not many people had seen anybody doing a bench press. Because back then, if you wanted to do a bench press, two guys had to pick up the bar and hand it to you, or else you would lay on the floor and you would bump your hips, put the barbell on your hips. So this is long before Brett Contreras, right? But this isn't what Brett had in mind. So they would thrust their hips up, they would bounce the barbell, they would catch it, and then they would do floor presses. And so these guys, and so now you have out there in California, you have the first benches. And once we have the first benches, then we get powerlifting. So now we have powerlifting and bodybuilding coming out of Muscle Beach, whereas before that, everything had been on the East Coast in York, Pennsylvania. That's where that's where York Barbell was, and that was the center of American weightlifting, was the York Barbell team. These guys would, like I said, these guys would win gold medals back before the Russians figured out steroids. And that's actually where they figured out steroids. It was a guy in New Jersey who was a doctor for the Olympic team that figured that out. And that happened in the late 50s, 1960s. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But that's where Vic Tanny comes up with this idea of franchise gyms. And eventually, thanks to Stallone and Schwarzenegger, Joe Weider, now we get to a gym culture that actually sticks. So the first gym I joined in 1980 was actually called Vic Tanny, and then it became, I think it became Bally Total Fitness before that completely collapsed and again lost to the dustbin of history. And now you've got LA Fitness and Equinox and all these Golds became a franchise long after Joe Gold was out of the picture. The guy who invented the Universal machine, Universal multi-station gym, that was another Muscle Beach guy. So everything that we consider part of gym culture now comes out of that, and including the personalities, and that's where the real legacy, the modern legacy, is.
The ground zero of it all.
This is like completely informative. You need to do like a You need someone to like do a documentary on it.
Lou, you probably should write a book about all this history stuff. Now we're talking about writing and reading, so it's. Hold on, let me see here. All right. You're always reading submissions constantly, so you're actually reading a lot of other people's stuff. But do you still find time to read interest stuff for yourself? It sounds like you do, and. You would have read a lot over the years. Is there a book or two that you feel everyone, industries, people certainly, but maybe enthusiasts would get a lot out of by reading it?
Wow, just one, huh?
You can have two.
I can have two.
If you give me 5, we'll be on the air for another half an hour. I know it. So
I can tell you. I can tell you books that changed my perspective.
That'd be good. That'd be great.
There's one called American Nations, which is about immigration to North America, and basically how we all ended up where we are, and why people from different parts of the country to this day see the world differently than people from other parts of. And I should say it's all North America. It includes Mexico and Canada in there. So that's one that if you want to understand how the world works, that's a great one. I'm trying to think of something that's more health and fitness related that really changed my point of view. And the thing is that everything I read seems to be a part of the bigger picture, and I'm trying to think of something that's the actual. That gives you a sense of the entire mosaic. That's not just like a straight out history book.
I don't know if there really would be one. And it doesn't necessarily need to be confined to fitness and what have you, because we've had people on here we've had conversations. I think a conversation we had with John Romanello, I know he talked about this in another podcast I'd heard, was the significance of Harry Potter and what it did for childhood voluntary reading. How the first Harry Potter book had single-handedly reversed that trend, or just being so in tune with what's popular and what your clientele may be interested in, not being so one-dimensional that all you know is fitness, but just being knowledgeable about a broader array of things. Therefore, you can have interesting conversation with people, so that way it's not always about the technical aspects of training and nutrition. So, and then, when it comes to writing, because it's an interest of mine, certainly, and certainly it's what you built a career on. You're not going to be the best writer if all you read is technical writing in your field. Experiencing a broader array of good literature, and it's another thing Romanello talks about. He'll often talk about Hemingway as one of his favorite authors, and how skilled a writer someone like Hemingway is. So exposing yourself to a broader array of literature is just simply going to make you a better writer for those people who are interested in that sort of thing.
Oh, sure. And that's one thing. I recently interviewed Chad Landers for an article that hasn't been published yet, among many other people in that article. And that's one of the things he said he advised personal trainers is be interesting. Yeah. If you're just a meathead and all you can talk about is meathead stuff, people aren't going to want to be with you for 2-3 hours a week. They're not going to enjoy that, even if they're getting results. And he said probably the best thing a trainer can do is travel. Get out of your city, and granted, now to say this in somebody who's 23 years old and, they're just struggling to make a living and move ahead in the fitness industry, they're going to be like, well, how the fuck do I travel? Take a couple of days off, get in your car, go somewhere, just hang out with some people, and maybe not essentially broaden your horizons.
Well, I can't remember where I read this, but it's true, is that usually the people you're training don't care about the specifics of the training. Like, they didn't come here to learn about biomechanics of a split squat. And even though you're super passionate about that and that's your simple story as a trainer, like, if that's all you got, that's going to be a long hour and they're probably not going to come back. You need to just even do something.
A couple of my clients are really into World of Warcraft, and I used to play it. I wrote an article kind of about those days. And though now they just released Classic WoW, so the original game has been brought back to experience it in its original form. So, those guys are really excited about this stuff. So that's something that we were talking about a lot in their sessions, because most of their movement patterns are pretty good. So there's not necessarily a whole lot of learning and building going on there. So we're finding out one guy's leveling up. I think he's got a level 15 paladin or some shit like this. I don't know. So
I take it that's good.
Well, he did level 15 in one day, and that's actually pretty good. So, yeah.
Excellent.
But even just having something else, and I think, like you said, traveling, but like you could do whatever. Like go join a bowling league. I don't care. Like meet other people that have those experiences, because at the very end of the day, you can just steal their stories and just lie.
Mm.
Well, and also, I mean, I remember Alan Cosgrove went out to Toastmasters to learn how to do public speak, to learn to be an effective public speaker. Now he, this current year, he was a keynote speaker on the Perform Better tour. But when you go to something like that, or when you join the Chamber of Commerce or whatever it is, if you're a gym owner, you meet the people who are like the people who would come to you for training.
Yeah.
And when you know those people and you have a frame of reference for them outside of the gym, you probably will be able to get more referrals, more people who feel like you understand them, even if they don't understand what you know about their physiology. They don't, like Dean said, you don't need to.
Yeah, no,
they don't need to know that. It's important that you know that. And I should say, all the stuff we're talking about does not supersede knowledge and experience. No. Those are the two most important things: is being good at what you do. And again, a process that can't be rushed. Some people catch on and figure it out faster than others. But as long as you're improving, it doesn't matter how fast other people improve. What matters is that you're getting better and figuring stuff out, and that you pass on, and that benefit extends to the people you train. And whatever happens after that happens, but first that has to happen. First you have to you have to be competent, then you have to be good, then you have to be better, and then you have to be great. And at that point, yeah, I'd like to know you.
Well, and then just to tie that all together, I think that you said that was the very first thing about people. You have to be good at what you do. But the hope is that the generation coming up, the 20s, the 21s, the whatever, early 20s, that they're learning from the people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s that learned all that. And by the time they're 40, 50, 60, they are at a way higher level. And everyone expects at 20 to be there. And you got a ways. You got to put in the work. And I think
absolutely. So somebody, like you said, somebody at 30, thanks to all this knowledge that's out there now, if they know how to filter it out, and if they're, if they're disciplined about how they go about finding it and processing it, somebody at 30 could be where it would have taken somebody until they were 40 to be able to do. I can remember John Berardi talking about how when he started off, I think it was John, I hope I'm not misquoting somebody else. I'm pretty sure it was John Berardi said when he was starting off, the way that you became a well-known fitness pro was you basically were on the road presenting and doing seminars like 50 weekends a year, and you never saw your family, but that's how you made money and that's how you got out and made a name for yourself. Nowadays, you can do that virtually. You don't need to leave your house, more than a couple times a year to actually network with people in person. And the rest of the time, you really can build relationships online, which is why I'm a big fan of the internet, despite all its obvious drawbacks.
Well, and this is a perfect segue to, we ask everyone this, but you tend to place the PTTC ahead of yourself as a brand, but where can our listeners find you online and experience more of Lou?
Well, I used to send people to my website. I don't know if there's any point in that. Facebook is kind of like, if I have something to say that's just me, that's where I'll say it. But again, because I work for John at the PTDC, I censor myself relentlessly. So, people, this is one of the few times people get the unfiltered Lou is when I do a podcast like this, or, sometimes when I write a longer article, but, I've sort of, I'm definitely on the sidelines with all the arguments going on now. So yeah, they want to know my background. My website's great. Actually, or if they go to the PTDC, go to, click on my bio there, sort of sums everything up in a few sentences, and then they can read my articles and, find all the links from there. But yeah, I would start at the PTDC at my author page.
Watch now, I'll get a phone call from John going, "What the fuck were you thinking putting Lou, or sending Lou loose on the fucking air like this shit, talking about coffee enemas?"
He started with the porn star. It didn't even start there.
We had John.
Technically I started with White Flower, didn't I?
Yeah, that's true.
If actually, so we've mentioned a few names in this one, and I like pointing this stuff out. So if you're someone who's kind of more following Lou and you're newer to finding us, or the first time ever, we've had John Goodman on the podcast quite a while ago. It's a really good episode, so you might want to scroll back and check that one out. We've had another one of you guys, Donnie Singer, on. And then you mentioned a guy like Chad Landers. Chad's been on. He's a great friend. He's a world-class person, world-class fitness professional. And we've thrown out a bunch of other names. So, if you actually scroll back through what we've done, we're just a little over 100 episodes now. And there's a lot of really cool people. There'll be something there for you, be it strength and conditioning guys like Christian Thibodeau or Brett Contreras. We've got one of the best episodes we ever did was with Brett Contreras. You mentioned Brett. Right. Or some really good soul stuff like Kelly Coffey and a lot of her experience with, training people, addiction and obesity and you name it. Kelly's really a vibrant personality. So hopefully you guys dig through our archives. We've got some really great stuff. Lou, thanks for coming on. It was a real pleasure to catch up with you. So big question. I'm going to put you on the air and you can shut me up if you want, but what are the plans for the Fitness Summit in 2020? Have you guys made anything concrete yet?
I can't make an official announcement.
Yep.
But we are definitely planning to do the Fitness Summit in 2020.
Great.
And you know what? I'll go ahead and I apologize to Nick Romberg for spilling the things. So you guys are literally the first to know. Is that as of now, we think this is going to be the last one.
Oh wow.
So we're hoping that we have a big turnout for our last time out, where we haven't even begun to approach speakers yet, but we want to make sure that the last one is the one that people remember, and that they remember us for the right reasons, and not for some of the other stuff.
Yeah, throw a big bash. So it's going to be a massive priority for me. It changed my career going there.
And mine too.
Yeah, and because I pulled you down the next year, and things exploded. You got linked up with Stronger You and Mike T. Nelson, a lot of good people, and it's been so influential that now, because we want to bring more of the benefits of these kind of events, Dean and I partnered up with Dean Somerset and a couple of our other team to have the Evolve Canadian Strength Symposium. So that's September 14th.
But to do that here, because it's you can't replicate it, and I don't even think we'll be able to. But it's that idea of, like you said, the good things is the event itself and not just the speakers. It's the whole fucking thing. Yeah. And
we've seen the growth of more great events like Tim Arndt's Inland Empire Conference, which happens very close to the Fitness Summit. And he's been doing a world-class job. He's an amazing host, makes everybody feel like a total VIP. And there's more. We have a bunch of minor stuff here coming up in Alberta as well.
I would say Andrew's mentioned you guys 90 out of the 100 episodes.
Absolutely.
At least
once. And thank you for doing that. And I think there's a good reason for it. Is that, we've mentioned Brett Contreras a couple times. The first presentation he ever gave was at the Fitness Summit in 2010. He had literally never gotten up in front of. He'd been a school teacher, so he'd been up in front of people, but he had never given a presentation at a fitness event. So we've had a lot of people who nobody had heard of when they showed up. A lot of people like Dean Somerset, Mike T. Nelson, you mentioned, they came out as attendees. Mark Fisher came out once or twice as an attendee before we even asked them to speak. Before literally, I'm sorry to say this, before I even knew who some of these people were, they came out as attendees. And sometimes there would be somebody who was like a brand name person, and it's like, well, I actually met you at the Fitness Summit 2 years ago, and it was like that. I'm sorry, I don't remember that. I know you're telling the truth, but that's how many people were there. The other thing is that because of the networking potential and the quality of the information and the relationships that people formed, we would have people come from literally every inhabited continent. Maybe not all in the same year, but Australia, Asia, well, I don't know about Africa, South Africa, yes. So South America, we would have people from every continent come out, because where else are you going to meet? Where else are you going to find this many people who you will find this interesting and who you want to know all in one place? And that's what we've. I hope that's what our legacy is.
Well, I think it's had a major impact on the industry, and I know it's done an enormous amount of things to inspire a lot of people's careers. I brought, a couple more friends down last year, and it just changed their perspective on things. They loved it. So it's a great event. I love being able to bring people to it just to share that world, because it's done a lot for me. Lou, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. And to everybody else, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in every week. And, now it's like 103-ish episodes, I believe we're at. Yeah. So, last week was Brian Cron, and we just got more stuff planned for you guys.
Cool. See you guys.
Shut up and sit down.